We all know Mondays can be a little rough, so here's a mech monster to help you get through it and start your week off the best way we can. I'm collaborating with Cam McLoud once more to make a creature from Horizon Forbidden West with everybody's favorite mechanic, water combat. I actually don't know how it was in the game itself, but anyway, here's the tidal techno terror, the Tideripper. This amphibious machine has a design reminiscent of a plesiosaur, which, if you want a bit of obnoxiously pedantic knowledge, isn't actually a dinosaur. It was actually a prehistoric marine reptile from the early Jurassic period, which doesn't exactly help us with the Tideripper's design, though I did reference a similar creature in Pathfinder to see if I could get any ideas from it. For the Tideripper itself, it is a rather large acquisition-based machine that is meant to sift through sediment in search of resources. To that end, it has drills set in its jaws, and is honestly strangely powerful going off of what I've read and been informed of by Cam. The Tideripper also makes considerable use of purge water, which some of you might remember from my design of the Slitherfang. Speaking of that slick cybernetic serpent, the Tideripper actually uses the same level as a Slitherfang with a level of 15 per Cameron's own build. This makes it quite the burly bionic beast, and one that also has the construct, robot, and tech traits, a classic among these Horizon horrors. Given the fact that we are building such a high level creature, I felt safe to use an extreme bonus for its strength, manifesting its mechanical might to mash marauders and more. However, since I used an extreme bonus there, I kept myself to only using a moderate value for its constitution. Now, the Tideripper is a rather graceless creature outside the water, and it is just a machine, which is why its dexterity and wisdom both only use a low value. You don't need to be super aware to sift through sediment, so it sees us use a terrible perception score as well, though we do have that classic dark vision in there for our aquatic automaton. Dipping into its skills, the Tideripper is a pretty simple construct that only has a low acrobatics and then a high athletics, which should help it swim through choppier waters. Now it does already have a swim speed, which you'll see down below, but such checks might still be necessitated by the nature of the environs through which it travels. I know I've said it before. I'm always a little iffy about using a moderate armor class, but by nature being a construct, the Tideripper comes with a lot of immunities. I also have it using a high amount of hit points, and on top of all that, it has a handful of resistances, including some to physical damage. With all this taking into account, I am sticking to that moderate armor class, though if you target its components, you're looking at a high armor class and an option to target its core, which bypasses all of its resistances. It does also have some weaknesses to take advantage of, but I built this bionic beast as a bit of a brute, so I want its defenses to overall be a tiny bit softer, and that is continued in the design of its saving throws. While its fortitude save is high, its remaining two saving throws of reflex and will only use a low saving throw value. Honestly, this fits with its dexterity and wisdom scores, and I've shifted a bit more of its power into its offenses as we are about to see. Alright, time to talk attacks. The Tideripper has 3 strikes, 2 melee, and 1 ranged. The former do use only a moderate attack bonus, playing into that brute nature, whereas its ranged attack uses a bonus in between low and moderate. I didn't go all the way for a low value since it does have the brutal trait, and a pretty decent range of 90 feet. However, based on it being a ranged strike, I only used a moderate amount of damage so that the Tideripper isn't incentivized to hang back and just launch stones and mud at foes from afar. Since its jaws are drills, I gave them the forceful trait, and applied reach appropriate for such a long neck creature, while also having it deal extreme damage. I don't often use this damage value, but given its defenses, I decided to settle on it this time around. And following on from that, it has its tail that it likes to swing around, leading to the sweep trait and high damage, since that sweep trait ends up increasing its accuracy by just a tiny bit. It's a poor man's agile, as I've said before, but the Tideripper has plenty more going on. Many, as in all, of the Tideripper's activated abilities are based around the purge water that it makes use of, so let's go ahead and start with that. Unlike the Slitherfang, the Tideripper doesn't use acid damage, so this establishes that its effects with the water trait that deal damage require a save against a moderate DC for this creature's level. On a failure, creatures become afflicted with an anti-magic field, based on the way that purge water can disable elemental attacks within Horizon Forbidden West. I kept the duration a bit shorter for the Tideripper than the Slitherfang, more so for the critical failure, since more of its abilities can trigger this effect. Though, as another option, players can attempt to take out its Purge Water Sacs component to remove the entire worry of this thing going on. Looking at the most basic of its available options, the Tideripper has Pressure Beam to launch pressurized jets of water. This deals limited use area damage at a high DC basic reflex save, though I did consider having this be an alternating line or cone effect, since the Tideripper does tend to wave its head around when doing these. Ultimately, I decided to just keep it a little bit simpler this time around. Another relatively simple effect comes in the form of its jet stream, which makes use of the same jets along its jaws. This allows it to launch itself forward with incredible speed, and then make a jaw strike at the end of that movement. Since this limits the Tideripper to a straight line movement, I wanted to add a little something extra to it, and based on its drills, as well as the crush state that it inflicts, I settled on persistent bleed damage. I also use the classic powerful charge effect where as long as it moves at least 20 feet, it gets a bonus on its attack roll, as we see with the likes of the boar. One quick note, my intent is that this triggers the Purge Water effect, but I'm not 100% certain that my wording is right to get that point across. That brings us to what might be the most unique of the Tideripper's attacks, its Whirling Tides. This is its big 3-action ability, and is meant to be used when the heroes close in on it, as it only affects a 15-foot emanation around it. It deals unlimited use area damage, and comes with a high DC reflex save. Outside of this damage, the spinning sprinkler on its spine sees it force creatures that try to get too close to it attempt a high DC fortitude save that knocks them prone on a failure. With this inclusion, I now have featured all 3 of the saves in its kit, though the fort and will save can feel a little ancillary. Now, in-game, this thing can go on for a while, and so I sought to represent that with a sustained effect on it. Its 3 actions to start it up, but then the Tideripper can keep it spinning for as long as it wants with a single action each round. Or, until the heroes disable it by taking out the tidal disc component. Now before we get into the closeout on this design, I want to make a tiny note that I found interesting/amusing. Cam's D&D design of our punchy plesiosaur actually had its tidal disc attack being the big damage dealer in its kit, whereas its streams of water were a good bit lower. However, I like the idea of leaning into the Whirling Tides as a sustained effect that it can keep going, and to really facilitate that, I had to have it dealing lower damage. I do typically try to follow his general ideas for these designs, but this one time around, for the mechanics, I had to deviate. But that does bring us to the end of the design of this deadly drone. Waiting in the waves, this weird wired whale wades into the wilds with whirling water and weighty wallops that whack warriors into the weekend. Cam says that he wants to work on some more marine machines, so dust off the underwater combat rules for what's to come. This is a high level one, which might make it a bit hard to fit in, but could be great to introduce while the heroes are sailing, or following a sudden violent cessation of such. You could totally have the Tideripper swim under the ship, and open a hole in it with its pressure beam to start sinking the vessel. Let me know what you think of this creature and what other sorts of monsters you'd like to see in a comment. If you like what you see here and want more, be sure to leave a like and then subscribe to the channel. You can also check out the blog, which is linked below along with the Twitter and Discord. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.